All right, guys. I have recently had the very great pleasure of completing Star Fox's challenge mode completely. I've done everything in the game. It took about 40 hours, and there's still plenty of online stuff to do and unlock. This is a pretty long, lengthy game, so I would not be surprised if it takes other players quite a bit longer to unlock everything. And as a result of that, there's going to be some locked lore tidbits, and people aren't going to be aware of what's actually in the game. So I thought it would be fun to just take a step back and kind of analyze, what's in this game, what's new about it, and what to expect when you finally get to that point. Like, what exactly is in Star Fox? What exactly do we know now about the plot, about the world, the setting, the characters, the general universe of Star Fox? Going by what we see in this game, there's not actually a whole lot new. Like, what we see here is kind of an elaboration on what we already knew. We have a little bit more context, and in a lot of cases, we're getting information that was only given to us through comics or through like the manuals or something in the actual game. Like, for example, I think it would be very common for most people to assume that Fox is from Corneria, but he's not. He's from a planet that's not even in the game called Pepitoon, right? That we've never ever even seen. So going through all of this and looking at all this information and like cross-checking it with like old information, all of it seems pretty consistent with what we've been told in the past. The character ages are the same, the dates and the times are the same, the events play out the same. We've even seen some like kind of reversions of the original English dub localization, in which Fox is actually more like he was in the Japanese version than he was in the original English version. Funnily enough, he's actually quite a bit more cocky and arrogant in the Japanese version. Like, that was more in line with the original version of the character. Now, I may be of the mind that the English version is actually quite a bit better than the Japanese, because I feel like back in the 90s and the early 2000s, the English localizers at Nintendo really did a lot to really give these games a really unique Western flair that gave it a lot of personality and made it a lot more appealing. But creating a version of the game that's more in line with the original Japanese script and retains a lot of the original personality is actually a really cool thing to see. Again, this is how the game was originally intended to look, sound, and play, and it's really exciting to finally get that version, even if it's not my preferred version. And what's more, it's nice to see that a lot of this lore is actually clearly stated in the game itself and not through comics or through other media. Because as a result of that, there was a lot of questions fans had about like how canon these comics actually work. Because I think a lot of the details are in line with canon games. You know, you have that farewell comic, Falco comic, where Falco leaves the team just before Adventures, which leads into the game. But then it doesn't really do a good job like setting up Falco's return, and it also does this weird thing where like Kat hooks up with like her blue counterpart, and it just doesn't really go anywhere. Like, he never appears again, and it's just like, by the time Command rolls around and Kat becomes relevant, it's just one of those weird things where it feels as if like, is this canon or isn't it? And I'm inclined to say no when it comes to the actual events, because considering what happens in Farewell Falco, where like Andros is cloned on like Titania or something, if that was canon, they would have brought it up in Adventures. But I digress. Star Fox on Switch 2 seems to be very focused on the lore as it was originally presented in Star Fox 64, where you have like the versions of the characters, you have every little bit of detail about them. They go into detail about Bill's history with Fox and Slippy. They go into like Fox's time at the academy. They go into like, how old he was when his dad died. They go into like, how the Great Fox had an 80-year loan on it that defaulted to Fox after James was killed. They go into like, how Peppy is like, mentoring Fox to take over the team. They go into like Falco being a gang leader before joining Star Fox. Like this is all stuff that was canon, but it's all stuff that's like casual players wouldn't know the first thing about because it's never actually said anywhere in the game. One of the things this game does way better is that it actually gives a lot of context as to why things are happening. Back in the day, you just kind of accepted that, like, oh, yeah, we're going through an asteroid field, or we're going to Vecina, or we're doing this, right? We're going to the sun for some reason. And there's not really like a stated reason why. But the way Star Fox does it is that they give a little bit more context, where they explain that Meteo is like a natural defense barrier around Corneria that Androst has to burrow through if he wants to get a fleet to come in from that direction. Vecina is a remote like intelligence agency facility that is essential to the war effort. Solar is a sun. It's a star that has that Andross is going to destroy with a bioweapon, right? Like this is all stuff that like feels as if it was very much in line with the original intentions of the 64 game. And I don't know if there's like any official documentation indicating that, but I imagine there must be, considering how natural it all flows together and how it all makes sense. Like little bits. Like Pepe taking his wife to Zonus for their honeymoon, and that's why he's shocked when they first go to Zonus in the 64 game, right? Like it gives you a lot more context as to like why characters say and do certain things in the original. And it's very much shockingly in line with what we already knew about the characters. Now, there are some examples of them changing characters for whatever reason. Kat is probably the most egregious, where she went from the flirty girl like archetype, this weird crack addict, alley cat. I don't know what they were doing with that design, and I thought about it a lot, and I decided that I'm not a fan of changing the character. Honestly, like I think a big thing that made Kat appealing was that she was so unapologetically feminine and very competent at what she does. Like trying to make her grungy and trying to make her more like edgy and more of a tomboy. I feel like they should have just designed another female character if they were going to do that. And that's just kind of my takeaway from this. Like they didn't need to change Kat. And then you have like other situations too. Like, General Pepper has this weird shady side that I seems to be more in line with how he was like portrayed in Command. And it's like, you get this situation where it's like, are they going to do anything with this, or is this like an unnecessary change? And I don't feel as if it serves any other purpose than to just be a bit more tailor-made for the modern audience, especially in the case of Kat. Like there's no reason to completely change Kat's personality other than to try and like redesign her for the modern audience. But that's the thing I noticed about this, looking at the lore bits and looking at like the information and looking at like what they're doing with this game. A lot of the information presented contradicts things we know in subsequent entries. It contradicts things that we know from like Command and Zero. So I have to wonder if this is going to be a full-on reboot, if it's going to be a complete reimagining of the entire franchise and a new starting off point for the story going forward, or if we're going to still consider like a lot of the things that happened in the GameCube era canon. And if I had my way, like everything from like 2002 to 2006 would be stricken from like the canon entirely. Like nothing of value happened during that decade, like at all when it came to Star Fox. So like for me, I'm looking at this and I'm just kind of shocked at how it doesn't really go into detail about like some of the history of the Lilat system and the potential for sequels, essentially. Like there are characters that are casually mentioned offhand, like Vivian and Lucy Hare and Beltino, Slippy's dad. But like by and large, like you just don't really hear a lot about the extended cast. And as a result of that, there's this very real question in the air. Like, what's going to come next? Like, are they going to do adventures? Are they going to do Assault? Are they going to make a new game? Like, I imagine they're going to make a new game. But if that happens, like, what are they going to do with like all this established stuff from the GameCube era Star Fox? Like, are they just not going to do anything with Crystal? Are they going to reimagine her? Is she never going to return ever? Like, there's all these very real questions about the legacy and history of these characters. Like we don't know necessarily like where things are going. So here's like a good example for you. Like if you go through like the holographic viewer, if you look at like James McLeod's bio, it does this thing where it's like, oh yeah, he's presumed dead. He's assumed dead. They never found a body. So like it's doing that thing where it's like questioning what they're going to do with James coming forward. Because, I think most fans of 64 would agree that, like, James is dead. He's 100% dead. Like, he comes back as a ghost at the end. People were willing to accept that. Or a hallucination. Like, he wasn't actually there. People were willing to accept that. But, like, the actual answer may be quite a bit more convoluted. Because if you go back to the original Super Nintendo version and Star Fox Zero, James is actually stuck in some weird like alternate universe bullshit where he's just in limbo indefinitely and can occasionally break free to do things like he's actually straight up playable in Command and is quite a bit better than Fox himself in that game. So like you look at situations like that, you look at like the lore and history of the character, you look at like how they're phrasing these things, and it's just like, don't tell me that they're straight up going to try and bring James back. It's like if they did that, they would like ruin one of the most iconic moments in like video game history. Like I just feel like we would never, ever, ever be able to take that like absolute Kino moment. Like we would never be able to go back if they go this direction. Like 64 changed a lot from the Super Nintendo version, but I think the most important thing that they did was kill off James. Like I think that's very, very important for Fox's character and for like the history of the franchise. It's like it's one of the most important things about it. And I think like backing away from that would be like just a disservice to the brand and like removing a big part of what makes Star Fox 64 so memorable and iconic to people. Now, obviously, this is just speculation, but it's definitely something I noticed going through these notes. Now, the other thing that caught my attention was some of the terminology used in especially some of the boss designs. Because, of course, you have like the bioweapons and you have like some of the AI stuff. You have like, a pretty wide range of like assault carriers and the golem mech and stuff like that. I used to think the golem mech must have been some like a relic of some lost civilization and not actually of Andross's making, but apparently it was. No, what interested me about like a lot of these enemy descriptions is how much it emphasized that Andross seems to have picked up extra galactic technology. That's actually something I noticed going through like a lot of these listings is how often the term comes up. The sorcerer from Katina, the giant mothership thing, like seems to have been based on technology from some ancient civilization that Andross picked up and just kind of used for his own purposes. Like he just kind of adopted it, you have situations like that, and there's a handful of other examples I could name, but like, you have a lot of indications that like they are actively thinking about what the universe is like outside the Lilat system. You have a little bit of an indication of that, where you have references to like extra galactic stuff and people coming in from outside the system, and you have references to places that aren't part of the system and stuff like that. Like you have like all these references to like lost ancient civilizations, right? Both Aquist and Titania have them. And I was thinking about this when I was like, doing Aquas over and over again, is just like, how Titania and Aquas both have these like very similar looking like ancient civilizations. I'm curious if like that's actually going to be a focal point going forward when it comes to like future Star Fox games. If like the Lost Civilization is somehow going to be like some major um influence on like the future of the series. Looking at these lore books, there's very little that's been changed from 64 itself, but I imagine there's a lot of room for interpretation when they finally get around to introducing some of these other characters. Characters like Veltino Toad or Lucy, or characters that we have seen before, but like haven't really necessarily been in more than one game. Like, I feel like when we do see these people again, it's going to be a radically different circumstance, and it's going to be a radically different experience. And that just begs the question, like, what are they going to do about Crystal? Like, how are they going to reintroduce her into the franchise? She's way too popular of a character to ignore. You know, you're just going to have a bunch of fanboys just like freaking out about it every time she doesn't show up. Like, I can't imagine the next installment isn't going to include her in some way. But that just begs the question of whether they're going to remake Dinosaur Planet, or if they're going to like do something else to introduce her. It's just one of the strange things about these games. I really truly don't know what to expect from the future of these games going by these lore books. Like, they're not really that specific about what's where some of this technology comes from, what some of this means, and like what could potentially befall the Lilat system after Andros is defeated. And I think that's the question that's up in the air right now is how much of Adventures Assault and Command is still canon? Are they still going to do that weird thing where they try to whitewash Andros's actions? Are they going to pretend that he has like the ability to cure like the poison in Venom's atmosphere? Like, are they going to like try and like go in that direction, or are they just going to like drop it entirely? I can't imagine they will, because one of the strong points of Command was how much adherence it showed to like Star Fox continuity. But like at the same time, it's not something that anybody really expects or even wants to see. And that's just kind of my thinking about it, is that like, are they going to toss it out all out the window, or is it going to come back in a big way? Like, that's just the major question at this stage, is like, what are they going to do about the future of this IP? And there's really no way to tell. I imagine I would be shocked if they're not already planning like a full-on Star Fox movie. Like, I imagine the way they're going to do this is that the Star Fox movie is already in production, and by the time that it's finished, we'll be seeing like the proper Star Fox sequel, and they'll just launch side by side. Like, that's kind of my thinking on this. Like, I think at this point it's inevitable that that Star Fox is going to be like a major Nintendo IP going forward. And I'm just very surprised at how well received this game has been. It's just very, very impressive to see just how much of a radical comeback this franchise has had over the last couple of months. And I'm sure it's not the only IP that's going to go through this process, but it's very interesting to see like how quick of a turnaround we've had about this, where we went from this thing being almost completely dead to just merch and movies and like new games, remakes, like it just the works. Right. There's a lot of things to look forward to about when it comes to the Star Fox brand right now, and I cannot wait to see what's next.